The clock on the booth's worn console ticked over to 3:07 a.m. Outside, the rain came down in sheets, turning the Greyfin Bridge into a slick black ribbon under the sickly orange glow of the sodium lamps. My world had shrunk to this 5 by 5 foot box of glass and steel, a cage suspended over the churning, dark waters of the Harbor View Strait. I finished stacking the last of the quarters, the cold metal a familiar weight in my palm. $73.50. Not enough. It was never enough. Rent was due Friday, and my landlord, Mr. Henderson, wasn't the type to accept promises. A pair of headlights cut through the deluge. Sweeping across my booth, I instinctively ducked my head, my shoulders hunching. The Urban Shield Authority. Their white and blue cruiser crawled along the bridge like a predator, its spotlight probing the dark corners where people like me tried to exist. USAT's official motto was securing our city's future, but everyone living paycheck to paycheck knew their real job to harass the poor until we disappeared. I held my breath until the spotlight passed, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The night droned on, a miserable symphony of rain, humming tires, and the rhythmic thump of the weathered expansion joints on the bridge. Then a new sound, a low growl that was too deep, too powerful for a typical late-night commuter. A black sedan, sleek and menacing, shot past the line of toll gates, using the emergency lane. It had no license plates. It screeched to a halt at a skewed angle by the maintenance shed, its engine a throbbing, impatient pulse in the wet air. A cold spike of adrenaline shot through me. This was wrong. This was the kind of wrong that ended up in a 2-paragraph story on page 6 of the Harbor View Ledger. My hand, slick with nervous sweat, slammed down on the red panic button under the counter. Nothing. No alarm. No flashing light. I hit it again. Dead. I looked at the security feed monitor. The screen was static, a blizzard of gray and white. It was like someone had reached into the bridge's nervous system and squeezed the life out of it from miles away. The driver's side door of the sedan opened. A man stepped out into the storm. He didn't run or shield his face from the downpour. He just stood there, letting the rain plaster his dark, tailored suit to his frame. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric. As he walked toward my booth, the light caught the pale, thin line of a scar on his cheekbone. My breath hitched in my throat. The scar was new, but the face was a ghost. 10 years ago, he was a boy named Rio, a lanky, fierce kid with eyes that held the entire history of the Baylight courts in their depths. The night the Vipers and the Scorpions decided to turn our block into a war zone, he'd shove me behind a dumpster, his body shielding mine as the world erupted in flashes and bangs. And then he was gone. Swallowed by the system or the streets. Everyone said he was dead, a casualty of a Besque purge that swept through the neighborhood like a plague. But he wasn't dead. He was here, walking toward me with a purpose that froze the blood in my veins. He stopped just outside the glass, the rain dripping from his dark hair. His eyes found mine, and the jolt of recognition was so powerful it felt like a physical blow. They were the same eyes, but the boyish fire was gone, replaced by something harder, colder, like forged steel. "Aria Annalise Moreno," he said. His voice was a low rumble, barely audible over the storm, but it cut through the noise and straight to my core. No one had used my middle name in a decade. It was a relic of a life before Baylight, before the struggle, before I learned to make myself small and forgettable. He raised a hand, pressing a plastic-sleeved photograph against the glass. It was faded, the corners soft with age. 2 teenagers on a graffiti-covered rooftop, grinning at a future that didn't exist. Me, with my hair in a messy ponytail, and him, Rio, with his arm slung protectively over my shoulder. In the background, hazy and distant, were the giant skeletal arms of the cranes at the Redwater terminal. A lump formed in my throat. It was a memory I had tried to bury, to forget, because remembering hurt too much. A chill that had nothing to do with the storm snaked up my spine. The man I thought had died in a hail of gunfire was standing in front of me, and as my gaze drifted past his shoulder, I saw it. Further down the emergency lane, parked in the shadows, was a large, windowless truck. It was completely dark, but I could feel the low, guttural thrum of its engine, the whisper of a heavy-duty air compressor, a ghost from my past, and a new, undefined threat had arrived at the same moment. The back of the truck opened. 3 figures emerged, moving with a fluid, disciplined economy of motion. They started walking toward the booth, their shapes solid and imposing against the rain. As they got closer, I saw the armbands, a stylized white orchid on a black background, the Orchid Syndicate. I'd seen their tags spray-painted over rivals' territory. They were new money, high-tech, and utterly ruthless, moving into the shipping and logistics rackets that were the lifeblood of Harborview. The man in front of me leaned closer to the glass, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Tonight, they're going to take you," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "They want to use you to force my hand, to make me sign a deal to move their unregistered chemical shipments through the port. You're coming with me." My instincts screamed. I fumbled for the gate control, the switch that would lower the steel barricades. My fingers found the toggle. But when I flipped it, nothing happened. The power was completely cut. The little green light on the console was dark. I was a fish in a bowl, and the sharks were circling. And the USAth, still nowhere to be seen. Their absence was as loud and terrifying as the sedan's engine. Someone was making sure they stayed blind. Before I could process it, he was at the booth's side door, the one reserved for maintenance. There was a sharp click, and the door swung inward. He hadn't picked the lock. He'd used a key card. I caught a glimpse of the logo as he pocketed it, a stylized inside a shield, Centricor, the biggest, most expensive security firm in the city, the kind of tech that protected billionaires and corporate headquarters, not a crumbling toll booth. The ease with which he bypassed it was terrifying. His hand closed around my arm. His grip was firm, unyielding, but not brutal. "Aria, now." He pulled me out of the booth, out into the raging storm. The wind howled across the bridge, tearing at my uniform, whipping my hair across my face. The 3 men from the truck were closing in, their faces grim and emotionless. We ran. Not toward the city, but toward the bridge's edge, to a small, grated maintenance tunnel. He pulled me through the opening just as the Orchid Syndicate thugs reached my booth. Above us, I heard the roar of an engine. The truck. It was coming for us. Dorian. He was Dorian Vale now. Not Rio pulled a road flare from his suit jacket. With a flick of his wrist, he sparked it to life. A brilliant, hissing crimson light cut through the night. He didn't hesitate. He spun and hurled it underhand, a perfect arc that ended right in front of the truck's massive front tire. The flare sputtered for a second on the wet pavement, and then the rubber ignited. A wall of orange flame erupted, a fiery slash painted across the canvas of the storm. The truck swerved, its horn blaring as the driver fought for control. That was our chance. Dorian pulled me toward a set of steel emergency stairs I never even knew existed, bolted to the underside of the bridge. Down he yelled over the wind. We scrambled down the slick, narrow steps, the river churning below us. The air was thick with the smell of burning rubber, salt and rain. At the bottom, tucked away in the shadows of the massive support pillar, was my car. My beat-up, 10-year-old Dodge. The one I had to coax to life every morning. The driver's side door was already open. He shoved me into the passenger seat and slid behind the wheel. The engine roared to life with a turn of a key he shouldn't have had. He threw the car into reverse, tires squealing, and executed a perfect J-turn in a space I didn't think was wide enough for a bicycle. He drove like he was born to it. Like the winding, treacherous roads of Harborview were etched into his DNA. He took corners I always slowed down for at full speed, his hands steady on the wheel, his face a mask of cold concentration. I risked a glance in the rearview mirror. Through the rain and the darkness, I could see figures on the bridge above. One of them was holding up a small flag or banner, letting it whip in the wind, a white orchid on a black field. It was a declaration. The hunt was on. We sped through the deserted industrial district, the warehouses and abandoned factories flying by in a blur. The adrenaline was starting to fade, replaced by a deep, trembling dread. He had saved me, but he had also dragged me into his world, a world of black sedans, silent trucks, and men with orchids on their arms. He finally spoke, his voice low and raspy, a raw sound that scraped against my frayed nerves. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were fixed on the road ahead, but his words were meant only for me, a whispered promise in the dark. "I finally found you," he murmured, the sound barely rising above the engine's hum. He glanced at me then, his steel-gray eyes pinning me to my seat, a decade of pain, of loss, of wondering, swirled in their depths. "After 10 years, now you're mine." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. A hot, furious anger surged through me, warring with the cold terror that held me in its grip. 10 years of silence. 10 years of thinking he was a ghost, a memory. And he comes back like this, a king claiming a long-lost possession, a flood of memories, laughter on a rooftop, the taste of cheap soda, the feel of his hand in mine crashed against the reality of the man sitting next to me. He was Rio, and he was a stranger. And his final, possessive declaration left me shaking, not just with fear, but with the terrifying, undeniable echo of the past, mine. The word hung in the supercharged air of the car, an echo of a boy's promise twisted into a man's decree. It was possessive, absolute, and it erased 10 years of empty space in a single, brutal heartbeat. My mind fractured, splintering between the here and now danger and the ghost of a memory. 10 years ago, the sirens were a constant scream in the Baylight courts. The Bureau of Economic Security Crimes, the BESC, had descended on our neighborhood with the subtlety of a wrecking ball. They called it a security sweep. We called it a purge. They were looking for Rio. He'd been running with a crew that had gotten on the wrong side of someone powerful, someone who could aim the government's fist like a weapon. He'd shown up at my window that night, rain-soaked and desperate, just like tonight. "They're coming. Ari, I have to go." I'd hidden him in the crawl space under the floorboards, my heart pounding in time with the heavy thud of tactical boots on the stairs. When the BSC agents kicked in my door, their questions were like punches. "Where is he?" I looked them in the eye and lied. I lied until my throat was raw. After they tore my tiny apartment apart and found nothing, they left. But they left a parting gift, a file. A permanent record labeling Aria Moreno as a known associate, a potential conspirator, a piece of paper that had slammed 100 doors in my face over the last decade. "My name is Dorian Vale now," the man beside me said, his voice pulling me from the wreckage of the past. He navigated the slick, industrial backroads with an unnerving calm. "Rio is dead." "A name doesn't kill a person," I shot back, my voice tight with a fury I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. "Silence does." "You promised you'd come back. That night, the last night, you promised." The memory was sharp, painful. His face in the dim light of my bedroom, the rain streaking the window behind him. "I'll find you. Ari, I swear it, and then nothing?" A decade of silence. A black hole where a boy used to be. I'd grieved him, mourned him, and eventually I'd buried him. "You have every right to hate me," Dorian said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "But you need to listen. I didn't die, and I didn't abandon you." He took a sharp left, the tires hissing on the wet asphalt. The BSC didn't just want to arrest me. The agent in charge, a man named Dre, wanted to recruit me. He staged my death, scrubbed my identity, and put me in a ghost program, a witness protection scheme that didn't exist on any official books. He thought he could shape me into one of his assets. The story sounded insane, like something out of a cheap spy novel, but the man beside me, with his expensive suit and the cold confidence of a predator, was living proof of it. And that file, the one that's made it impossible for me to get a decent job, a decent apartment, a decent life, was that part of your protection? His jaw tightened, the muscle feathered, a tell I remembered from when he was a boy. "No," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "That was Dre's insurance policy, a way to control me. He put that on you to keep me leashed. For 10 years. I've been playing his game, learning his systems, his networks. I built my own operation from the inside, the Marrow Line, a logistics network that runs parallel to his corrupt world. And the entire time, my only goal was to get powerful enough to burn him and his associates to the ground, to find the man who put that file on your name and erase him." His words were a confession and a revelation. He hadn't been gone. He'd been fighting a war I never knew existed. For me. The thought was both terrifying and something else. Something I didn't dare name. "What do you care about my life?" I asked, my voice softer now, laced with a bitter weariness. "What do you even know about it? I know you work 2 jobs, the toll booth and stocking vending machines on the night route through the warehouse district. I know you're barely making rent on a walk-up on the south side, and I know you're doing it all to take care of your father." A cold dread washed over me. Dad, Ezekiel, the old longshoreman who'd taken me in when I had no one. He'd been my rock, my entire world. A crane accident at the port 2 years ago had shattered his leg and his spirit. He was recovering, but slowly, and the medical bills were a mountain I could never seem to climb. My life was a fragile house of cards, and Dorian Vale had just kicked in the door. As if summoned by my thoughts, my phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from an unknown number. My blood ran cold when I opened it. It was a photo. My small, cramped apartment, the one I'd left only a few hours ago. The picture was taken from the window of the building directly across the street, looking right into my living room. The small lamp I always left on was a lonely, defiant speck of light in the gloom. They knew where I lived. They were watching. I showed the screen to Dorian. He glanced at it, his expression unreadable, but a flicker of something dark and violent passed through his eyes. "The Orchid Syndicate has been watching you for weeks," he said, his voice flat. "They own the U.S. Ath Patrol on your beat. The plan tonight wasn't just to talk. They were going to have U.S. Ath detain you for questioning on some trumped-up charge, a procedural arrest, and you would have simply vanished into their custody." My stomach churned, the vague harassment, the constant feeling of being watched. It wasn't paranoia, it was a net, slowly closing around me. Dorian reached into his inner suit pocket and pulled out a small, metallic object shaped like a USB drive. He pressed it into my hand. It was cool and heavy. "This is a cold wallet," he explained. "It holds encrypted financial ledgers. Every dirty dollar the Orchid Syndicate has laundered, every official they've paid off, including Dre at the Besk. It's the proof. Only you have it. If I die, release it to the press, burn them all down." The weight of it in my hand was immense. It was a key, a weapon, a death sentence. The anger, hot and familiar, flared back to life. Again I hissed, my voice trembling. "You show up out of nowhere, tear my life apart, and hand me your burdens just like Baylight. Your trouble becomes my trouble, your fight becomes my cage." But I didn't throw it. I couldn't. I clutched it in my fist, the sharp edges digging into my palm. He was right. It was a burden, but it was also the only leverage I had in a world that had suddenly turned upside down. It was a ticket to survival. "We need to move Ezekiel," he said, his tone shifting. "Becoming all business. Now. Tonight, I have a safe house. Northbridge. They'll never find him there." "No," I said immediately, my protective instincts roaring. "You don't get to take him. You don't get to control that part of my life. Arya, they know where you live. They know about him. He's a liability they won't hesitate to remove." He was right. The thought of those men, the ones with the orchids on their arms, getting anywhere near my father made me physically ill. "Fine," I conceded, my voice tight, "but it's temporary. A week, until this is over and I go with him. Those are my terms." Before he could answer, 2 pairs of headlights flooded our car, one from the front, one from behind. 2 black sedans, identical to Dorian's, had boxed us in on the narrow service road, My heart leaped into my throat. Dorian didn't even flinch. He slammed the car into reverse, the engine screaming. "Hold on," he gritted out. He cranked the wheel hard, and the world became a dizzying blur of motion. He was aiming for a dark, impossibly narrow alley between two warehouses, Kestrel Row. He hit the handbrake at the last second, and the car spun a perfect 180 degrees, the rear bumper missing the brick wall by inches. We shot down the alley, the sedans in hot pursuit. Their high beams were blinding in the rearview mirror. I saw a glint of light from their dashboard. A camera. They were recording this. On pure instinct, I fumbled in the glove compartment, my emergency kit, flares, my hand closed around one. I rolled down the window, the wind and rain roaring in. I braced myself against the door, sparked the flare, and threw it with all my might. It arced through the air and smashed against the windshield of the lead car. A blinding flash of magnesium white, the car swerved violently, crashing into a pile of overflowing dumpsters, blocking the path for the second vehicle. We burst out of the alley and back onto the main road. In the distance, the first faint wail of a siren started up. Usath. But it was too far away, too slow. It was the sound of help arriving just late enough to be useless. A calculated delay. This game was bigger than I thought. The board was the whole city, and the players were all corrupt. Dorian glanced at me, a flicker of something surprised respect in his eyes. He turned his attention back to the road, his face set like stone. The immediate danger had passed, but the tension in the car was thicker than ever. I finally looked at him, really looked at him. The boy was gone, replaced by this hard, dangerous man. But was the boy truly gone? "If you disappear again," I said, my voice quiet but steady, a vow made in the storm-tossed darkness. "If you leave me to clean up your mess one more time, don't ever expect me to forgive you." He drove in silence for a long moment, the only sound the rhythmic slap of the windshield wipers. When he finally answered, his eyes were locked on the road ahead, but his words were a brand on my soul. "This time, Arya," he said, his voice a low, unbreakable promise. "I'm not going anywhere." And in his profile, illuminated by the passing streetlights, I saw it, a flicker of the boy I once knew, the fierce protector from Baylight Courts. But now, that fierce loyalty was encased in something new, something as hard and as sharp as steel. Safe House Northbridge wasn't a mansion. There was no sweeping driveway, no marble floors, no army of silent men in dark suits. It was a converted warehouse in the city's forgotten industrial spine, a brick and steel box pressed up against a set of rusted, abandoned railway tracks. The front was a defunct shipping company, Pike and Sons Freight, a perfect dusty camouflage. The inside smelled of stale coffee, ozone from the servers, and the faint, metallic scent of old machinery. Our living space was a loft built into the back half, minimalist and functional, with exposed ductwork and mismatched furniture. The security wasn't flashy, it was practical, homemade. Small, discreet cameras tucked into corners, pressure sensors under the windowsills, and a quiet competence that was far more reassuring than armed guards would have been. They brought my father in just before dawn. Dorian had sent a two-man team in a nondescript panel van, disguised as medical transport. Ezekiel limped in, his face a mask of stubborn pride, his jaw set against the pain in his leg. He surveyed the warehouse with the critical eye of a man who'd spent 40 years sizing up cargo holds. He looked at Dorian, not with fear, but with a deep, bottomless suspicion. "So you're the ghost from Baylight," Ezekiel said, his voice a gravelly rumble. He didn't offer a hand. "Something like that, sir," Dorian replied, his tone respectful. The standoff was broken by the simple act of making tea. I'd put the kettle on, my hands moving on autopilot. Dorian stepped in, taking the mug from my hand. "Let me," he said softly. He didn't just dunk a tea bag. He warmed the ceramic mug with hot water first, measured the loose-leaf black tea with a precise hand, and poured the water just as it hit a rolling boil. He let it steep for exactly 4 minutes before straining it, adding a splash of milk and half a spoonful of sugar without asking. He handed the mug to Ezekiel. Port Authority blend, if I remember right. My father took the mug, his eyes widening slightly as he took a sip. It was exactly how he'd taken his tea every morning of his working life. He looked from the mug to Dorian, and a fraction of the granite wall of his suspicion crumbled away. You remember, he grunted, and it was the closest thing to an approval I'd heard him give any man I'd ever known. With my father settled, the rest of Marrow Line trickled in. They weren't a gang of thugs. They were a team of specialists. Nova Bly was a whirlwind of nervous energy and brilliant smiles, her fingers flying across a keyboard as she parsed data streams, her official title being Digital Forensics. Harlan Pike, the name on the front of the building, was a broad, bearded man with the gruff demeanor of a seasoned trucker, which he was. He was the master of logistics, the man who could move anything, anywhere, without leaving a trace. And then there was June Okoye, who went by Wires. She was quiet, almost unnervingly still, her eyes seeming to see the world in lines of code. She was their cybersecurity, the silent guardian of their digital fortress. Each of them wore a small, discreet pin on their jacket or collar, the stylized head of a finch, the Marrow Line sigil. My education in this new world began immediately. It wasn't about learning to shoot a gun. It was about learning to survive. Harlan showed me how to rig the main door with a length of high-test fishing line and a tiny bell scavenged from a cat toy. Won't stop him. He grunted, his big hands surprisingly nimble. But it'll wake you up. An extra 2 seconds can be the difference between breathing and not. I spent an hour practicing. The simple, tangible act of setting the trap a strange comfort. I was no longer just waiting to be a victim. That evening, the local news was on the common room's television. A polished news anchor was talking about a new port security initiative, a joint venture between the USAF and the Harborview Port Council. They showed footage of a smarmy-looking councilman named Tobias Kincaid shaking hands with BESC's own Eli Dre. A shell game, Dorian said, standing behind the couch. Orchid gets a private, city-sanctioned security contract through a shell corporation. They get access to the port's infrastructure, control over the camera feeds, all under the guise of public safety. He handed me a small, rugged two-way radio. It was heavier than it looked. This is a Kite 5, he explained. Encrypted. Short range. For inside the safe house and the immediate vicinity. We check in every hour when we're in different parts of the building. Later. His voice came through the small speaker. A quiet, low crackle. Aria. Check-in. I'm here, I answered, my voice feeling strangely loud in the quiet of my small room. Good, was all he said, but the simple word, the confirmation that we were connected in this small, unseen way, was a tether in the storm. It was a sliver of the care I hadn't realized I was starving for. The second night, the lights went out, not just in the warehouse, but the entire district. One moment the room was lit. The next we were plunged into an absolute, disorienting darkness. Emergency power kicked in a second later, casting the room in the cold, blue-white glow of LED strips. It's not a standard outage, Nova announced from her bank of monitors, which were running on a dedicated battery backup. Her face was illuminated by lines of scrolling code. Something hit the grid. A coordinated surge, like a poison pill. Military-grade tech. They know we're in this sector, and they're trying to flush us out. The air grew thick with tension. They were hunting us, systematically. Later, when June had confirmed the perimeter was secure, I found my way to the roof access ladder. I needed air. The cold hit me like a slap, and with it, something else. Snow, soft. White flakes were drifting down from the black sky, an unseasonal spectacle in early autumn. The city was a glittering tapestry of distant lights below, beautiful and indifferent. I heard the clang of the ladder and turned to see Dorian climb onto the roof. He didn't say anything, just came to stand beside me, his hands in his pockets. We watched the snow fall in silence, the only sound the faint hum of the city. I was shivering, more from adrenaline than the cold, but he noticed. He shrugged off his heavy wool coat and draped it over my shoulders. The fabric was warm, smelling faintly of him, something clean and masculine, like cedar and cold night air. The simple weight of it was grounding. The silence stretched, no longer tense, but filled with a decade of unspoken words. My eyes traced the line of his scar in the dim light. He turned his head, and his gaze met mine. It was a long, searching look, a question asked without words. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, wild thing. The air between us grew thin, charged with a static I could feel on my skin. His breath plumed in the cold air, mingling with mine. Slowly, tentatively, his hand came up, his gloved fingers brushing a snowflake from my cheek. His touch was feather-light, a ghost of a sensation, but it sent a tremor through me. He was asking for permission. I gave it with a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He leaned in, his eyes never leaving mine. It was agonizingly slow, a deliberate, careful advance that gave me every opportunity to pull away. I stood my ground, my world narrowing to the space between our lips. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, his mouth hovering just over mine, a promise of warmth in the freezing air. And then the world exploded in light. The floodlights on the surrounding buildings, the streetlights, the entire power grid roared back to life, chasing the shadows away. We both flinched back, the spell broken. The moment was gone, tucked away for another time. A wry, shaky smile touched my lips. "You always know just when to stop to annoy me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He looked at me, a ghost of a smile playing on his own lips, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I've learned," he said, his voice a low rumble, "that rushing means losing." Before the moment could settle, a sharp buzz came from his phone. He pulled it out, his expression hardening as he read the screen. He turned it so I could see. A new text from an unknown number. No picture this time, just words. 48 hours, the key, or the Grayfin Bridge will run red. The threat was no longer just about me. They were willing to harm civilians, to create a public spectacle, to paint my bridge the one place I'd felt a sliver of ownership over with the blood of innocence. Dorian let out a long, slow breath, his gaze fixed on the distant lights of the bridge. "This is no longer a shadow war," he said, his voice grim. "They're taking it public." I clutched the cold wallet, which was zipped into the inner pocket of my jacket. The weight of it felt different now. Before, it was a burden, a dangerous secret he had thrust upon me. But now, seeing the raw threat spelled out on that screen, I understood. It wasn't just his burden, it was my weapon for the first time. I wasn't just the woman who needed saving. I was the variable. I was the one holding the key that could either lock the cage or burn the whole corrupt city down. And the choice, I realized with a terrifying clarity, was mine to make. The threat hung in the air of the safe house, thick and suffocating. 48 hours, the clock had started ticking, and its every second was a hammer blow against the fragile walls of our sanctuary. Sleep was a luxury none of us could afford. The main loft became a command center, fueled by caffeine and a low-grade, simmering dread. Nova's keyboards clicked like a nest of angry insects, while June stared into her monitors, her face bathed in the glow of cascading code, a silent sentinel in a digital war. "Got him," June said, her voice quiet but cutting through the tension. She pointed a single, elegant finger at a line on her screen. The work order to deactivate the Grayfin Bridge security system. It was routed through a Centra-Core subcontract. The payment authorization, digitally signed and sealed, came from the office of a Port Council official, Tobias Kincaid. A face flashed on the main monitor, smarmy, just as he'd looked on the news, mid-50s with soft hands, a tailored suit, and the predatory smile of a man who'd never done a day of honest labor in his life. He was Orchid's man on the inside. "And I have his money," Nova chimed in, swiveling in her chair. She brought up a complex flowchart of accounts and shell corporations. "It's beautiful. in a sociopathic kind of way. He's been funneling bribes through a charitable fund, the Harbor Hearts Collective. They claim to support families of displaced dock workers. In reality, it's a high-volume washing machine for Orchid's cash. Dorian, who had been pacing a track into the concrete floor, stopped. His entire body went still, coiled like a spring. "Kincaid," he said, the name a piece of grit in his mouth. "Harlan, I want to know everywhere he goes. His home, his office, his favorite bar. I want to know when he sleeps and when he breathes." Harlan nodded grimly. "Already on it." The implication was clear. Dorian's solution was direct, brutal, and final. He was going to cut the head off the snake. And a part of me, the part that had been running and scared for the last 48 hours, screamed in approval. But another part, a louder, clearer part, rebelled. "No," I said, stepping forward. Everyone looked at me. It was the first time I'd offered a strategic opinion, and the weight of their collective gaze was heavy. "You can't just go after him." Dorian turned to me, his eyes dark. "He's the linchpin. Arya, we take him out. Their political cover collapses." And then what I countered, my voice stronger than I expected. "They replace him with another Tobias Kincaid. This isn't just about one corrupt official. Dorian, it's about the system that lets him exist. You saw the news. The USF, the BSC, the Port Council, they're all in bed together. If you make Kincaid disappear, they'll call you a monster, a gang leader eliminating a rival. They'll use it to legitimize their crackdown, and the public will believe them. You'll be the villain, and the real disease will just fester in the dark." "So we do nothing," he shot back, a dangerous edge to his voice. "We let them threaten to turn a public landmark into a slaughterhouse." "No, we don't do nothing. We do it smart." I was almost yelling now, my hands clenched into fists. "We have the proof. Nova has the money trail. June has the digital signature. You don't take him out in a dark alley. You expose him in the light. You give this information to a real reporter. You leak it online. You let the public see the Harbor Hearts Collective for the sham that it is. You make it impossible for them to hide." Our argument was a magnet, pulling us into the center of the room. The air crackled. It was fierce, raw, and for the first time since he'd crashed back into my life, we weren't a crime lord and his quarry. We weren't a ghost and the girl he'd left behind. We were two people on the same side of a war, arguing over the battle plan. We were partners. The realization seemed to dawn on him at the same moment it did on me. The anger in his eyes softened, replaced by a look of startled appraisal. The silence that fell was more profound than the argument that had preceded it. Nova cleared her throat, suddenly fascinated by her keyboard. Harlan decided the coffee pot needed his immediate attention. One by one, they found reasons to melt away, leaving Dorian and me alone in the vast, open space. Later that night, long after the others had retired to their makeshift sleeping quarters, I found myself in the small kitchen area, staring into a mug of cold tea. I couldn't sleep. The argument replayed in my head, but it was the silence that followed that haunted me. I heard a footstep on the concrete behind me. I didn't need to turn around. "You were right," Dorian said, his voice a low murmur in the dark. I turned, and he was standing a few feet away, a shadow among shadows. "It's not enough to be strong," I said quietly. "My father taught me that. The cranes at the port are strong, but if the foundation is rotten, they still fall." He closed the distance between us. He didn't touch me, but I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He stopped in front of me. So close I could see the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes. His hand came up, hovering in the air for a moment before he gently, so gently, cupped my cheek. His thumb stroked my skin, a silent question in his touch, his eyes asking for the permission his lips did not. I leaned into his hand, a silent surrender, and closed my eyes. It was all the answer he needed. His other arm wrapped around my waist, pulling me against him. It wasn't the desperate, frantic grab of our escape, but a firm, grounding embrace. I buried my face in the crook of his neck, breathing in his scent. My arms went around his back, my hands splaying across the hard muscles. clinging to him. We just stood there for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet darkness of the kitchen, our breathing the only sound. "I missed you for 10 years, he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name, his lips against my hair. The confession was a crack in his steel armor, a glimpse of the boy he'd been. The simple, devastating words broke something open inside of me, a decade of loneliness and unsaid grief. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his hands cradling my face. He leaned down and his lips met mine. It was a kiss, full of longing and regret, a silent apology for a decade of silence and a desperate promise of a future I couldn't yet imagine. The intensity of it stole the air from my lungs, and when we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. The next morning, the chill between us had thawed. The awkward dance of two strangers thrown together was gone. When I walked into the common area, shivering, I didn't hesitate to grab his coat from the back of a chair and pull it on. It swallowed me whole, but it was warm. A few minutes later, he handed me a mug of coffee. It was black, strong, no sugar, exactly how I liked it. He'd been watching me. He'd been learning me. The comfortable quiet was broken by Harlan. "Got a flag on the Redwater Terminal manifests," he announced, tapping on a tablet. "Orchid's been moving containers listed as empty, but they're using duplicate seal codes on the bills of lading. They piggyback a real, empty containers code onto their phantom box. To a cursory inspection, it all looks legit. They're planning a big shipment tomorrow night." An idea sparked in my mind, reckless and terrifying and undeniably right. "We need to see what's in that container," I said. "We need our own proof." "My men can't get close enough to plant a tracker without being seen," Dorian said. "Orchid's people are crawling all over that terminal." "Your men can't," I said, my voice steady. "But I can." Every head in the room turned to me. Dorian's face was a thundercloud. "Absolutely not." "Think about it," I pressed, my mind racing. "They're not looking for me. They're looking for a man's team, a woman in a USAth uniform doing a routine check. No one would look twice. I know the procedures. I see them every night from my booth on the Greyfin. I know the rhythm of the port. I can do it." "It's too much of a risk, Arya," Dorian said, his voice a low growl. "What's the alternative?" I shot back, stepping toward him, sitting here, waiting for them to make their move and letting them control the board. I am tired of being a stationary target. Dorian, I spent 10 years being a victim of a system I couldn't see. Now I can see it. Let me fight back. He stared at me, a war raging in his eyes between the ruthless pragmatist and the fierce protector. The pragmatist knew I was right. The protector was screaming at him to lock me in a room and throw away the key. Finally, he let out a harsh breath. "Fine," he bit out, "but we do this my way. We establish rules. You have wires in your ear the entire time. The second you feel like something is wrong, you say the safe word Redwater, and you walk away. No heroics, no improvising. You stick to the plan. Agreed." "Agreed," I said, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. That afternoon, Ezekiel sat in a worn armchair, the light from a bare bulb glinting off the needle in his rough, calloused hands. He was mending the pair of leather work gloves I wore for the vending machine job, stitching a torn seam with the meticulous care of a surgeon. He didn't look at me as he spoke. "That boy, Dorian," he said, his voice gruff. "He's got the look of a man who's been to hell and built a home there. You be careful, little bird." He tied off the thread and held the gloves out to me. His eyes, when they finally met mine, were shining with a fierce, painful mix of pride and worry. "But you always were tougher than you looked." That night, I stood in front of a mirror in a spare USAth uniform Harlan had procured. It was a perfect replica. I practiced the walk, the bored, slightly arrogant posture of the patrol officers I'd spent years avoiding. I made my face a blank mask, my movements efficient and calm. Dorian stood across the room, leaning against a steel support beam. He didn't speak, just watched. His arms were crossed over his chest, his face unreadable, but I could see his hands. His knuckles were white, betraying the storm of tension he was holding inside. As I was about to call it a night, a news alert flashed across the television screen, the same polished anchor from before, her face grave. "We have breaking news. The Bureau of Economic Security Crimes has just announced a major new initiative, Operation Clean Sweep, aimed at dismantling violent criminal enterprises operating out of the Harborview port." I stopped breathing. It was the same language they'd used 10 years ago, the same rhetoric. It wasn't a real operation, it was a media campaign, a smokescreen to cover their real moves, to distract the public while they made their play. I looked at Dorian, and he was already looking at me, a grim understanding passing between us. The board was being set, and tomorrow night, I was voluntarily stepping onto it. The Redwater terminal at night was a kingdom of metal and shadows, ruled by the incessant, high-pitched scream of the gantry cranes. The entire yard was bathed in the harsh, unnatural orange of sodium vapor lamps, which bleached the color from everything and made the stacks of containers look like colossal, rusting tombs. The air was thick with the smells of diesel fumes, brine from the nearby sea, and the cold, damp scent of steel. This was the city's heart, and it beat to a rhythm of relentless, mechanical industry. My own heart was a frantic counterpoint to that steady rhythm. The fake USAth uniform felt stiff and foreign against my skin, the fabric itching at my neck. A cloned ID card was clipped to my belt, its weight a tiny, constant reminder of the lie I was living. "Okay, Aria." June's voice crackled softly in the tiny earpiece I wore. It was a calm, steady presence in the storm of my anxiety. "You're approaching Gate 7, and the guard is a new hire. Name's Peterson. He's more interested in the podcast he's listening to than his job. Just walk like you own the place." I took a breath and forced my shoulders to relax, adopting the slightly swaggering, bored walk I'd seen on countless USAth patrols. I nodded at the guard as I approached the turnstile, not even making eye contact. I swiped the card, the light flashed green, and the turnstile clicked open. I was in. I didn't look back. "I'm in," I whispered, my voice barely a tremor. "We see you." Harlan's gruff voice joined June's. "I'm moving the Trojan horse into position on line 7. Just a standard 20-footer, listed as empty and bound for sanitation. You've got a 4-minute window once it's in place." "June, you ready?" Dorian's voice. It was low, controlled, but I could hear the frayed edge of tension underneath. It mirrored my own. "System is open," June replied. "I've created a ghost manifest. The moment you place the device, I'll validate the seal code. As far as their system knows, that container was checked and sealed an hour ago." I moved through the yard, my boots crunching on loose gravel. A forklift rumbled past, its driver giving me a lazy, uninterested glance. I was invisible in this uniform, a part of the machinery. I reached line 7, a long row of containers waiting to be loaded. Harlan's bait, a plain blue container, sat at the end of the line. Across the way, maybe 50 yards distant, the Orchid crew was working under a set of floodlights, their movements efficient and practiced. They were loading a series of smaller, unmarked crates into a similar-looking container. That was their shipment. My hands, slick with sweat inside the leather gloves Ezekiel had mended, reached into my utility belt. The device was a small magnetic disc, no bigger than a hockey puck, a high-resolution camera and microphone. I walked the length of the container, pretending to check the seals, my heart slamming against my ribs. I found the spot Harlan had marked in a photograph, a recessed groove on the underside of the chassis. With a final, steadying breath, I knelt down, slapped the disc into place, and heard the satisfying clunk of the magnets engaging. "Device is planted," I whispered. "Got it." June confirmed. "Seal code validated. Get out of there. Aria, walk, don't run." I was just turning to leave when the world dissolved into noise. A deafening alarm blared across the entire terminal, punctuated by flashing red lights. It wasn't our alarm. This was the real thing. My blood ran cold. Men in black tactical gear swarmed into the yard from all sides, fanning out with military precision. They had BESC insignias on their body armor. My first thought was that their Operation Clean Sweep was real, that they were here for Orchid. But they weren't. The BESC agents ran right past the Orchid crew, who had frozen in place, their faces a mixture of confusion and panic. The agents didn't even glance at them. Instead, they raised their rifles and aimed them at the shadows, at the tops of the container stacks, at the exact positions where I knew the Marrow Line lookouts were hidden. This wasn't a bust, it was a trap laid for us. There had to be an insider. Someone had leaked our plan. Then, a figure appeared on the gantry of a crane high above the chaos. Dorian. He stepped into the light, his hands raised high in the air, showing they were empty. He was a lone, defiant figure against the night sky. From the BESC command vehicle, 2 men emerged. The first was Tobias Kincaid, the corrupt port councilman, his face smug and triumphant. The second was the BESC agent in charge, Eli Dre. A shark smile was plastered on his face. This was his moment, his perfectly executed checkmate. And behind them, a local news van rolled into position, its camera already aimed at Dorian. Dorian Vale Dre shouted through a bullhorn, his voice booming across the yard. "You are under arrest for the kidnapping of Aria Moreno. Release the hostage. It's over." He held up a sheet of paper. A warrant, a fake warrant, broadcast for the entire city to see. They were painting him as the monster, and me as the helpless victim. The narrative was set. The lie already being cemented as truth. They were going to take him down and make themselves heroes in the process. My fear was a cold, hard knot in my stomach, but beneath it, a white-hot rage was building. They thought I was a pawn, a damsel in distress. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I reached under the collar of my uniform and pressed the small button on the discreet microphone pinned there. "Now, Nova," I said, my voice quiet but clear. In the command center, Nova would have hit enter. My voice, amplified through the news crew's own broadcast frequency, suddenly cut through Dre's triumphant posturing. "My name is Aria Moreno," I said, my voice steady and loud, echoing from the very speakers that were meant to condemn Dorian. "And I have not been kidnapped." Dre's smile faltered. Kincaid looked confused. "For the last 48 hours, I continued, my voice ringing with a conviction I didn't know I possessed. "I have been a guest of Dorian Vale, who saved my life from the Orchid Syndicate, a criminal organization being funded and protected by men like Tobias Kincaid and Eli Dre." On the Jumbotron screen behind the news anchor, the live feed of the port suddenly glitched. It was replaced by Nova's handiwork, a flow chart, simple and damning, showing money flowing from Orchid's known accounts into the Harbor Hearts Collective, and from there, directly into shell companies owned by Kincaid. "The Harbor Hearts Collective isn't a charity," my voice declared. "It's a money laundering operation." The screen changed again, a high-resolution scan of the Centricore work order, the one used to disable the Greyfin Bridge security, and at the bottom, Tobias Kincaid's forged digital signature, glowing in red. The screen changed one last time, to a grainy but undeniable surveillance photo of Eli Dre in a parking garage, accepting a thick envelope from a known Orchid enforcer. Dre's face went from smug to ashen in a single heartbeat. He was speechless. The trap had been turned back on the trapper. A low murmur started among the dock workers who had been herded back by the initial BESC wave. Now, they surged forward. A wall of bodies in hard hats and work boots. Phones came out, dozens of them, all recording, their small lights like a field of angry fireflies. "That's Aria from the bridge," one of them yelled. "She lets us through and we're short on tolls." "Go on, Aria," another shouted. The narrative wasn't just flipping, it was shattering. Seeing their perfect plan disintegrate, the Orchid crew made their move. They weren't trying to fight, they were trying to escape. One of them raised a rifle and fired a burst into the air, trying to create panic. The BISC agents, disoriented and leaderless with Dre frozen in shock, returned fire wildly. Bullets sparked and ricocheted off the steel containers, a deadly, chaotic rain of metal. In the confusion, a hand grabbed my arm. Dorian, he had somehow made it down from the gantry. "Time to go," he yelled over the din. He pulled me into the labyrinth of stacked containers, a maze of dark, narrow corridors. We ran, our footsteps echoing in the tight space. A stray bullet whizzed past my head, and Dorian's arm instinctively came up, shielding me. We ducked behind a massive container as a shower of sparks rained down from a ricochet. In that fleeting moment, surrounded by chaos and the scream of twisting metal, our eyes locked. There was no time for words, but everything was said in that look. It was a shared promise, a bond forged in fire and fear. I trusted him, and he trusted me. We heard the belated sound of USATH sirens approaching the terminal, but when their cruisers arrived, the officers were hesitant, confused. They were met with a wall of dock workers, all with their phones held high, live streaming the scene, shouting accusations at the BESC. Public opinion had become a shield. Dre, seeing he'd lost control, barked orders into his radio. It was a retreat disguised as a tactical maneuver. "Fall back, secure the perimeter," he yelled, his voice strained. In the chaos, a single orchid truck, the one they'd been loading, peeled out of the yard and disappeared into the night. They had gotten a part of their shipment out. Dorian watched it go, his face grim. The battle for the port was over, but the war had just been elevated to a new, political level. We found a moment of quiet in the deepest part of the container maze. The sounds of gunfire faded, replaced by shouting and sirens. The adrenaline began to recede, and a violent tremor started in my hands. The full weight of what had just happened, of what I had just done, crashed down on me. I started to shake uncontrollably. Dorian stepped in front of me, his hands gently taking my shoulders. He didn't pull me into a generic, comforting hug. He just stood there, his presence a solid, unshakable anchor in my swirling storm of emotions. He looked directly into my eyes, and what he said next changed everything. It wasn't "I'll protect you," or "I've got you." "I trusted you," he said, his voice low and raw with an emotion that went deeper than gratitude. "You did it, Arya." For the first time, it wasn't his plan, his power, his world. It was mine. He had given me the weapon, but I had been the one to pull the trigger. He had handed me the stage, and I had delivered the lines that had changed the entire play. In the heart of the metal labyrinth. He wasn't my savior. He was my partner. And in his eyes, I saw not the reflection of a girl who needed to be saved, but the woman who had just saved them both. The morning after the port was a detonation of headlines and news alerts. The Harborview Ledger, the city's oldest paper, ran a front-page story with a picture of Dre's stunned face on the terminal jumbotron. The headline was stark-besque, and Port Council implicated in syndicate corruption. The article was cautious, filled with official denials and promises of full internal investigations, but the seed of doubt had been planted in the public mind. Our broadcast had been a grenade thrown into a hornet's nest, and now the whole city was buzzing. The victory, however, was short-lived. By noon, a uniformed court officer delivered a subpoena to the front of Pike & Sons Freight. Harlan accepted it with a grim face. It had my name on it. I was being summoned to testify before a state grand jury on charges of obstruction of justice and interfering with a federal investigation. Reading the official, stamped document, the floor seemed to fall away from beneath me. The cold, bureaucratic language was a ghost from my past, the same sterile tone that had been on the BESC file that had shadowed me for a decade. They weren't just fighting back. They were using the system itself as a weapon. The one battlefield where Dorian's strength and my newfound voice meant nothing against the weight of the law, the old fear, the familiar, suffocating feeling of being a nail waiting for the hammer, came rushing back. Dorian found me on the small, grated balcony off the loft, staring at the rusted, silent train tracks below. He didn't need to see the paper in my trembling hand to know what had happened. "I can have you on a plane in 4 hours," he said, his voice quiet. "A new name, a new life. Somewhere they'll never find you. Costa Rica, Portugal, anywhere. 10 years ago, I would have taken the offer without a second thought. I would have run and never looked back. But staring at the summons, at the faceless power trying to crush me back into silence, something inside me hardened. "No," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but it was as solid as the steel tracks below. I turned to face him. "I'm done running from files and whispers. I spent 10 years letting them define me. Not anymore. I don't run. Dorian, I speak." He searched my face, looking for any hint of doubt, but he found none. A slow, almost imperceptible nod was his only reply. It was an acknowledgement, a transfer of power. We were past the point of him making decisions for me. That night, we sat at the long wooden table in the common area, just the two of us. We needed new rules for this new reality. What we created wasn't a romantic promise. It was a strategic and personal treaty. We called it the Northbridge Compact. Rule 1, absolute respect for personal autonomy. No decisions would be made about my safety or my role without my full consent. Rule 2, total transparency of risk. No more hidden dangers or sugar-coated truths. We would face the consequences, together and with open eyes. The final rule, the one that made my breath catch, was about us. All physical contact, every touch, every kiss, required clear, unambiguous consent. It was a rule born from a decade of his absence and a lifetime of my caution. It wasn't about desire. It was about respect. Later, we found ourselves on the balcony again, the chill night air a welcome shock to the senses. The city lights painted the low-hanging clouds in shades of orange and gray. I shivered, and he wrapped his coat around my shoulders, the same one from the rooftop, pulling me back against his chest. We stood there, sharing warmth, watching the city breathe. His arms were a circle of safety, but it wasn't a cage. He tilted my chin up, his eyes asking the question our compact demanded. I gave him my answer by rising on my toes, and our kiss was different this time. It wasn't born of chaos or desperation. It was a slow, deliberate exploration, a quiet conversation in the dark. My hands found their way into his, our fingers lacing together. "Don't disappear again," I whispered against his lips, the words a raw plea that had been buried in my heart for 10 years. "Never," he murmured, his voice a solemn vow. The next step was to take our fight public, on our own terms. Nova, it turned out, had a past life as a community organizer. She found us the perfect venue, Kite House, a run-down but beloved community center in my old neighborhood. She put out the word through union channels and social media. There would be no slick PR firm, no official press conference, just me, a microphone, and a story to tell. I expected a handful of reporters and maybe a dozen curious onlookers. Instead, the place was packed. Dock workers in their union jackets stood shoulder to shoulder with truck drivers. Toll booth operators from every bridge in the city had come on their day off. They were my people, the invisible cogs that made the city run, and they had come to hear one of their own speak. Standing at that podium, with Dorian and the team standing silently at the back of the room, I didn't talk about crime syndicates or kidnapping plots. I told them about working the graveyard shift on the Grayfin Bridge. I talked about counting quarters to make rent, about the fear of a U.S. spotlight, about the constant, grinding pressure of a system designed to keep you down. I told them how that same system, the one that harasses a toll worker for being $50 short, gives men like Kincaid a free pass to steal millions. My story was their story, and the room listened with a heavy, profound silence. It was no longer about a mafia boss and a witness. It was about a working woman fighting a corrupt machine. The system, of course, fought back dirty. The next day, a pro-Besque news blog published an article with the headline, "Who is Aria Moreno?" They had gotten their hands on my sealed juvenile file. They painted me as a teenage delinquent, a willing accomplice to a young gang member named Rio. They twisted my lie to protect him into a story of criminal conspiracy. It was a classic smear, designed to discredit the messenger by poisoning her past. Dorian was incandescent with rage. "I'll shut them down," he snarled, his hands clenching. "I'll buy the blog and burn the servers to the ground." No, I said, putting my hand on his arm. The muscle underneath was coiled as tight as a steel cable. You can't. If you use force, if you use your money and power to silence them, you prove them right. You make me look like a gangster's moll who can't take the heat. No violence on this front. Dorian, we fight this with the truth. He hated it, but he agreed. While he stood down, his team went to work. June unleashed a digital counteroffensive, not shutting down the blog, but dismantling the network of bot farms that were amplifying the story on social media. Harlan, meanwhile, created a series of simple, powerful infographics. They were designed to be shared, impossible to misinterpret, showing exactly how the money from the Harbor Hearts Collective flowed into Kincaid's pockets. We didn't silence their lies. We drowned them in truth. The pressure worked. By the end of the week, facing overwhelming public outcry, the Port Council announced the indefinite suspension of Tobias Kincaid. It was a small victory, but it was a victory, and it created a crack in the wall. That night, I received an encrypted email. It was from the last person I expected, Madeline Shore, another member of the Port Council. The message was brief and to the point. They're going to make Kincaid the scapegoat. They'll sacrifice him to save the rest of the operation. I have information that goes higher, but I need assurances. Meet me. She proposed a public place, a busy cafe downtown, the next afternoon. It's a trap, Dorian said immediately. Maybe, I agreed. Or maybe she's just a rat trying to get off a sinking ship. Either way, I have to go. This could be the break we need. He wanted to go in my place or surround the cafe with his people. I held my ground. This started because they underestimated me. Dorian, let's not make the same mistake. She contacted me. I will meet her. You can be there, but you will be out of sight. You have to trust me to handle this. Trust. It was still a new language for us, but he was learning. He agreed. The cafe was crowded, noisy with the lunch rush. I chose a small table by the window. Madeline Shore was already there, a nervous-looking woman in her 60s with a strained face. She clutched her handbag like a life preserver. Dorian was where he said he would be, a ghost in the crowd, sitting at an outdoor table across the street. Just another man reading a newspaper. Shore didn't waste time with pleasantries. She slid a data key across the table. This is everything, she whispered, her eyes darting around the room. Shipping manifests, offshore account numbers. It goes all the way to the top of the BESIC, but it won't matter. Orchid is moving to their endgame. She explained that Orchid wasn't just going to disappear. They felt cornered, and they were planning a massive, final act of defiance. The annual Harborview Maritime Fair was in 2 days, a huge public event held at Pier 77, drawing thousands of families and tourists. Orchid wasn't just planning to disrupt it. They were planning to use the chaos as cover for a major act of public harm, something that would send a message to the entire city, an attack on civilians. I left the cafe with the data key feeling like a block of ice in my pocket. The game had changed again. This was no longer just about exposing corruption. It was about preventing a catastrophe. I met Dorian at the corner, my face pale. I didn't have to say a word. He could see it in my eyes. I reached out and took his hand, my fingers gripping his tightly. We have a new priority, I said, my voice low and determined. Protecting those people comes first. We defeat Orchid second. The Harborview Maritime Fair was an explosion of life on Pier 77. The air, usually thick with the industrial tang of the port, was now a chaotic but happy mix of salt water, fried dough and cotton candy. Brightly colored banners snapped in the sea breeze, and the cacophony of carnival games, live music, and the laughter of children filled the vast, open space. It was a perfect picture of the city at play, and the sight of so many families, so many innocent people enjoying a sunny afternoon, settled like a heavy weight in my gut. They were the reason we were here. They were the stakes. I stood at a small information booth, a Kitehouse community outreach banner strung up above me. My role was simple: hand out pamphlets, give directions, and be a friendly, visible presence. It was the perfect cover. My father, Ezekiel, was a few yards away. stationed behind a large pot of steaming clam chowder, ladling out free cups to anyone who wanted one. He was in his element, his gruff exterior melting away as he joked with the kids, a gentle giant ensuring everyone felt welcome and safe. It was a carefully constructed scene of normalcy, but beneath the surface, the marrow line was at war. "Signal sweep is clean for now," June's voice murmured in my earpiece. A ghost only I could hear, but I'm picking up encrypted drone chatter on a restricted frequency. They're here. "Nova, what's your read on their payload?" Dorian's voice, a low and steady counterpoint. "Based on the energy signatures and the chemical residue we found on their last abandoned device, it's not an explosive," Nova's voice crackled back. "It's a chemical agent, non-lethal, but designed to create a thick, disorienting smoke. It's a panic device. They want to cause a stampede. Harlan evacuation routes." "Set," the gruff voice confirmed. "The city's official plan is a bottleneck. I've highlighted secondary egress points on your HUDs. Yellow lines painted on the pier itself. Get the crowd to follow the yellow lines." I looked down. There they were. Faint yellow lines, almost invisible unless you were looking for them, leading away from the main exits and toward wider, safer service access points, a breadcrumb trail through a potential disaster. Dorian was a ghost in the crowd. I could feel his presence more than see it. Dressed in the dark blue coveralls of a pier logistics crew, he moved through the fair with a quiet purpose, never straying more than 30 feet from me, but never hovering. He was respecting the North Bridge Compact, trusting me to take the lead, but his coiled intensity was a tangible thing. He was a panther, feigning sleep, ready to spring at the first sign of trouble. The attack came without warning. The cheerful music from the main stage suddenly died. The power to the entire pier cut out, plunging the bright, sunny day into a confusing twilight inside the massive, covered exhibition hall. A collective gasp went through the crowd, followed by nervous laughter. A standard power outage. But then came the sound, a high-pitched, electric whine from above. I looked up. 4 black drones, each the size of a dinner plate, hovered in the gloom like malevolent insects. Before the crowd could fully process what they were seeing, the overhead lights in the main hall shattered. One after another, in a shower of sparks and glass, the laughter died, replaced by a rising wave of screams. This was it. Panic is a fire, and it spreads with terrifying speed. People started to push, to shove, their only instinct to get to the main entrance where they had come in, a bottleneck, just as Harlan had predicted. I grabbed the bullhorn we had under the information desk. My hand was steady. "Everyone, please remain calm," my voice boomed, cutting through the initial wave of fear. "This is a power failure. The main exits are blocked. Please look at the floor. Follow the yellow lines. Walk. Do not run. Follow the yellow lines to the service exits." My voice was firm, a rock of authority in the chaos. I was no longer Aria Moreno, the toll booth worker. I was a guide. People hesitated, their faces pale and frightened in the dim emergency lighting. Then they started to see the lines. A few brave souls started moving, and soon a steady, orderly stream of people was flowing toward Harlan's pre-planned escape routes. One of the drones broke formation, swooping low over the crowd. Its mission wasn't to drop its payload. It was to herd the panicked people back toward the main entrance, to increase the pressure, to start the stampede. From the corner of my eye, I saw a blur of motion. Dorian. He leaped onto a stack of wooden crates and from there, scrambled up the steel rigging of a lighting truss like a spider. He moved with a speed and agility that was breathtaking. He reached a crossbeam just as the drone buzzed past. In his hand was a heavy-duty cargo hook, the kind the longshoremen used. He swung it in a vicious arc. Steel met plastic and carbon fiber with a sickening crunch. The drone spiraled to the ground, its rotors shattered. He landed on the pier with a soft thud, but as he straightened up, I saw the blood welling up on the back of his hand, a deep, ragged gash where the drone's rotor had clipped him. There was no time to think. I ripped a strip of fabric from the kite house banner, a piece of the kite's tail, and ran to him. Our eyes met over the chaos. I grabbed his hand, my touch firm, and quickly wrapped the makeshift bandage around the wound. Pulling it tight, "Thanks," he grunted, his eyes never leaving mine. "We're not done yet," I whispered back, my heart a frantic drum against his. Just then, a new sound cut through the screams, the roar of a heavy truck engine. A refrigerated delivery truck was plowing through a temporary barrier, heading not for the crowd, but for one of the main evacuation routes Harlan had designated. It was trying to cut off the escape. On the side of the truck, a familiar logo was painted a stylized kite, the Kite House. They were using our symbol, the symbol of hope I had tried to build, as a mask for their terror. There was no time for a plan. I just acted. I sprinted toward the truck as it barreled past. I leaped, my fingers catching the edge of the passenger side running board. The momentum almost tore my arm from its socket, but I held on, my feet scrambling for purchase. I pulled myself up, my face level with the passenger window. The driver, a man with dead eyes and an orchid tattoo on his neck, stared at me in disbelief. I didn't give him time to react. I slammed my elbow into the window. It spiderwebbed but didn't break. I hit it again. All my fear and rage behind the blow. The glass shattered. I reached inside, past the shocked driver, and grabbed the steering wheel. With a desperate, guttural scream, I yanked it to the right. The truck veered wildly, away from the fleeing crowd and toward an open, empty staging area piled high with shipping pallets and canvas tarps. At the same moment, the passenger door was wrenched open from the inside. Dorian, he had somehow gotten on the other side. He didn't go for the driver. He lunged for the emergency brake, yanking the heavy lever with all his strength. The truck's back wheels locked up. The vehicle skewed sideways in a gut-wrenching, 90-degree skid, the scream of tortured rubber echoing across the pier. The back doors of the truck burst open from the force of the turn, and its cargo, dozens of 50-gallon drums, spilled out, tumbling across the concrete. But they didn't explode. The truck shuddered to a halt, its engine stalled, just feet from a stack of propane tanks. The silence that followed was more shocking than the noise. The driver, dazed, was quickly subdued by a group of furious dock workers, the USAth patrols, who had been completely useless during the chaos. Finally arrived, their officers looking bewildered, their authority gone, the crowd, now safe, had their phones out, their cameras all pointed at the truck, at the fake Kite House logo, at me and Dorian standing beside it, in the distance. I could hear someone shouting a hashtag, bridge worker. We slipped away in the confusion, melting back into the shadows of the pier. We found refuge on a small, rickety wooden dock. Away from the lights and the sirens, I sat on the edge, my legs dangling over the dark, slapping water, and finally allowed my body to shake. The adrenaline was gone, leaving behind a deep, bone-aching exhaustion. Dorian stood a few paces away, giving me space. He didn't say a word, just let the silence stretch. After a long moment, he took a step closer. He stopped just in front of me. He didn't touch me. "May I?" he asked, his voice a low, rough whisper. It was a question that held the weight of our compact, of his past, of my fear. I looked up at him, at his bloodied hand, at the fierce loyalty in his eyes, and I gave him a single, shaky nod. He knelt in front of me and gently pulled me into an embrace. I went willingly, my arms wrapping around his neck, my face pressing into the solid warmth of his chest. His arms circled my back, holding me securely, a human anchor in the aftermath of the storm. We stayed like that, our foreheads pressed together, my ragged breathing slowly starting to even out, syncing with the steady, reassuring rhythm of his heartbeat. It was an intimacy that had nothing to do with passion and everything to do with trust. A quiet sanctuary built in the heart of a war zone. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a harsh, intrusive sound. He pulled away slightly to look at it. I watched his face. The brief moment of peace we had found was shattered, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift. His body tensed, the muscles in his jaw tightened. His eyes, when they flickered up to mine, were guarded, a steel shutter slamming down. He angled the screen away from me, but it was too late. I hadn't seen the words on the screen, but I had read them in his eyes. A secret. A crack had just formed in the foundation of our fragile trust. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, his expression a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. But I knew something was wrong, and for the first time since he'd come back, he was hiding it from me. The text message had been a stone thrown into the still waters between us, and the ripples were already beginning to spread. An anonymous message delivered to his phone. "Your mole isn't Besk. They're in Marrow." The secret Dorian carried was a poison that seeped into the air of the safe house. The easy camaraderie we had built was replaced by a taut, humming suspicion. He didn't tell me what the message said, but I saw it in the way he watched everyone, his eyes lingering a fraction of a second too long on faces he'd trusted for years. The crack between us had become a chasm of unspoken words. The proof of the betrayal came 2 days later. Ezekiel had an appointment with a physical therapist, a carefully vetted doctor far across town. Harlan had planned a route that was a masterpiece of misdirection, full of switchbacks and dead ends. Yet, halfway through the trip, the two-man security detail reported a tail of persistent black sedan that mirrored their every move. They managed to lose it using a pre-planned emergency maneuver, bringing my father back to the warehouse, his face pale and grim, but safe. The route had been compromised. The leak was real, and it was inside our walls. Dorian's response was swift and cold. He locked himself in the server room with June for hours. When he emerged, his face was carved from granite. He called a meeting in the main loft, his team arrayed before him like soldiers awaiting a verdict. "The transport route was leaked from one of our encrypted channels," Dorian announced, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. June traced the data packet. It was masked, rerouted through 3 external servers, but the origin signature matches a terminal that has only ever been used by one person here. He paused, and his gaze, heavy with a decade of friendship and a fresh, agonizing betrayal, settled on the biggest man in the room, Harlan. The name dropped into the silence like a stone. Harlan Pike, the gruff, loyal man who had been Dorian's right hand since the beginning, looked as if he'd been physically struck. His face went slack with shock, then flushed with a deep, wounded anger. "Dorian, that's insane," he growled, taking a step forward. "You know me." "The data doesn't lie," June said softly, though she wouldn't meet Harlan's eyes. "I'm looking at the data right now, and I'm telling you it's a lie," Harlan roared. Dorian's hand went up, silencing him. "Until we know for sure. You're on lockdown. No access to comms. No leaving this building." I couldn't stay silent. "You can't be serious," I said, stepping into the tense circle. "You're going to condemn a man you've trusted for 10 years based on a digital ghost. This is exactly what Orchid wants. They want us to tear ourselves apart." "It's my call. Aria," Dorian said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "No," I insisted, standing my ground. "It's our call now. We're in this together. Remember, if the data is a lie, then prove it. If there's a snake in this house, don't just guess which hole it's in. Make it show itself. Set a trap." The idea hung in the air. Dorian looked at me, a flicker of the strategist in his eyes warring with the wounded friend. He hated the idea of using Harlan as bait, but he knew I was right. It was the only way to be certain. The plan was simple. Dorian would brief Harlan on a new, urgent relocation plan. We would be moving my father that night to a secondary safe house, an old industrial depot in the Glass Point district. The information would be given to Harlan verbally, and he would be allowed to access a terminal to review the logistics, a terminal we would be monitoring. Harlan agreed immediately, his face a mask of grim determination. He was desperate to prove his innocence. 40 minutes after he accessed the file, June's silent alarm tripped. A satellite feed of the Glass Point depot showed 2 Orchid sedans and a panel van moving into position, setting up a clear ambush. They were waiting for us at a location that only a handful of us knew existed, a location Harlan had just been told about. But Harlan hadn't left the room. He hadn't made a call. The leak was instantaneous. Someone else had seen the plan. Nova and June immediately dove back into the data, their fingers flying, their search narrowed. The breach wasn't from Harlan's terminal. It was a mirror hack, a ghost in the machine that had duplicated his access credentials. The trail was complex, deliberately convoluted, but it led to a single access point, the main cybersecurity hub, June Station. The evidence was too neat, too perfect, a digital trail that screamed, "Look at me." It felt staged. I saw Dorian's eyes harden as he looked at June, the newest member of his inner circle. But my mind was snagged on something else. The anonymous text Dorian had received. "Your mole isn't Besk." It was a strange detail. Why would the sender specify that it was a clue, meant to redirect? It implied the mole was someone they wouldn't suspect, someone deep inside. My gaze swept across the room. Dorian, June, Harlan, and Nova, bright, energetic Nova, the digital forensics expert, the woman who had access to everything, the woman who analyzed every piece of data that came in or out of this building. She didn't just guard the walls like June. She mapped the entire kingdom. I found her later in a quiet corner of the warehouse, ostensibly recalibrating a signal booster. Her shoulders were hunched, and there was a tension in her that hadn't been there before. I kept my voice low. "It's you, isn't it, Nova?" She didn't flinch, but a single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. She turned to face me, her brilliant smile gone, replaced by a look of utter despair. Why, I asked, the question devoid of accusation, only a deep, weary sadness. "My little brother," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He's brilliant, got a full scholarship to a top engineering school, but we're not documented." Kincaid got his hands on his file. It was holding my brother's future, his entire life, in his hands. He said all I had to do was provide them with information, not operational details, just movements, locations. He promised no one would get hurt. He promised it was just business. Her story was a gut punch. She wasn't a traitor. She was a sister, trapped in an impossible choice. I thought of Ezekiel, of what I would do to protect him. I couldn't condemn her. "You have to tell Dorian," I said. "He'll kill me," she sobbed. "Or worse, he'll just throw me out, and Kincaid will destroy my brother's life." "No," I said, making a decision that I knew would put me in direct opposition to Dorian. "We're not going to tell him. Not yet. We're going to give you a way out. You are going to give us every piece of evidence you have on Kincaid's blackmail. You're going to help us save your brother and burn Kincaid to the ground. And then, when it's over, you will confess to Dorian yourself. You will own what you did. That's the deal." The confrontation with Dorian was explosive. When I told him my plan, told him that I had gone behind his back and offered a deal to the mole who had almost gotten my father killed, his control finally shattered. "Are you insane?" he roared, his voice echoing in the vast space. "She betrayed us, Arya. She put your father in the crosshairs. My only priority is protecting you, and you go and make a deal with the person who is actively trying to get you killed." "Your priority is control," I shot back, my own anger rising to meet his. "You're so focused on protecting me like I'm some fragile possession that you can't see the person standing in front of you. Nova isn't the enemy. She's a victim of the same system we're fighting. I didn't offer her a deal to be nice. I did it because her testimony, her proof of the blackmail, is the weapon that can destroy Kincaid for good. This isn't about your anger, Dorian, it's about winning. I am the one who makes the strategic decisions here. That time is over." I stepped closer, my voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. I jabbed a finger at his chest. "I am not one of your soldiers you can order around. I am your partner. I took a risk at the port, and you trusted me. Now I am asking you to do it again. Trust me like I am trusting you." The standoff was absolute. His anger warred with the truth in my words. He was a man who had survived for a decade by trusting no one, and I was asking him to trust me with everything. Finally. The rage in his eyes receded, replaced by a deep, painful conflict. He turned and walked away without a word. The chasm between us felt a mile wide. Later that night, he found me sitting on the cold concrete floor of the loft, hugging my knees. He sat down across from me, the silence stretching between us. "The compact," he said finally, his voice rough. "It's not enough. Your rules. My rules. We need a rule for when they conflict." And so, we added a new clause, an emergency veto. Either of us could overrule a strategic decision made by the other, but only if we could prove it posed a direct, immediate threat to innocent life. It was a compromise, a balance of power. It was his way of saying he was still afraid, and my way of saying I understood. With the treaty amended, the tension finally broke. I reached out and took his hand. He laced his fingers with mine. "I'm afraid of losing you again," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "When I thought you were gone. I built this entire world, this fortress of steel and secrets, so nothing could ever touch me again. Then you came back, and you walked right through the walls, and it terrifies me. I'm afraid," I confessed in turn, "of becoming just another part of the fortress, another asset to be protected, another possession. I need to be your partner. Dorian, not your princess." He brought my hand to his lips, his gaze holding mine. "You could never be anything less than my equal," he murmured. He leaned in and kissed me. It was slow and deep and full of the raw, painful honesty of our conversation. It was a kiss of reconciliation, a sealing of our new, more complicated and infinitely stronger pact. The next morning, Nova delivered. She gave us an encrypted file containing audio recordings of her conversations with Kincaid, clear evidence of his blackmail. Armed with this, I contacted Madeline Shore. She was horrified, and she agreed to testify. She said Kincaid and Orchid, feeling the walls closing in, had forced the Port Council to schedule a public hearing in 2 days. Their plan was to use the hearing as a stage, to publicly denounce us, to paint the entire investigation as a gang war. And, she added with a tremor in her voice, they had made it clear that if we showed up to contest their narrative, they would not hesitate to turn the hearing into another, far more tragic, public spectacle. They were setting their final trap. Not in a dark alley, but in the heart of the city's government, in front of the cameras and the public. They were daring us to walk into the fire. Harborview City Hall was a powder keg dressed in marble and mahogany. The main chamber was a suffocating press of bodies and television cameras. Reporters lined the walls, their faces a mixture of predatory hunger and professional boredom. Men in the crisp, dark suits of the Bureau of Economic Security Crimes stood with their arms crossed, projecting an aura of unimpeachable integrity that was a grotesque parody of the truth. At the entrance, nervous-looking U.S. ETH officers manned a metal detector, a flimsy, theatrical gesture of security in a room where the real threat wore a three-piece suit. The members of the Port Council sat on their raised dais, a row of frightened-looking figures caught in the glare of a spotlight they had never wanted. And in the front row, radiating a confidence that was almost obscene, sat Tobias Kincaid. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, a slim, gray-suited lawyer at his side. He looked for all the world like a respected public servant, wrongly accused and ready for his vindication. I saw them then, scattered through the public gallery and even among the event staff, men and women, with the same telltale stillness I'd seen on the Orchid crew at the port. They were here to ensure their version of the story was the only one that survived the day. My name was called. A hush fell over the room. Every camera, every eye turned to me. I walked from the back of the chamber, my footsteps echoing on the marble floor. I could feel Dorian's presence, a steadying weight in the sea of hostile faces. He was standing near the exit, just another face in the crowd. His presence a quiet promise, not a threat. For the first time, I wasn't walking as a victim or a target. I was walking as a witness. I reached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out not at the council, but at the cameras, at the people of Harborview who were watching. My voice, when I began to speak, did not tremble. "My name is Aria Moreno," I began. "A few weeks ago, I was working the night shift at the toll booth on the Grayfin Bridge, counting quarters to make rent. That life ended when a man named Dorian Vale saved me from being taken by the Orchid Syndicate. I laid out the story, piece by damning piece, the disabled security systems, the Centracore contract. I explained how the syndicate laundered its money through a charity meant to help the very people it was poisoning. I told them about the Harbor Hearts Collective. My testimony wasn't emotional. It was a cold, clear recitation of facts, a simple map that led directly from the city's corrupt heart to the fear I had lived with every day. When I finished, the room was silent. The next witness called was Madeline Shore. She walked to the podium with the hesitant steps of a woman who had spent her life avoiding confrontation. But when she spoke, her voice was firm. She produced documents, internal Port Council memos, that corroborated everything I had said. She detailed the false Centracore contract, confirming that the order to stand down the bridge's security cameras had come directly from Kincaid's office. A wave of murmurs and whispers swept through the chamber. Kincaid's confident smirk began to look strained. Then, a side door opened, and a new figure walked into the room, Nova. Her presence was an electric shock. The reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. "My name is Nova Bly," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "I am a data forensics engineer, and for the last 6 weeks, I have been feeding information about the Marrow Line's movements to the Orchid Syndicate." A gasp went through the room. Kincaid's face went white. This wasn't part of his plan. "I did not do it for money," Nova continued, her eyes finding Kincaid in the front row, a look of pure, unadulterated loathing on her face. "I did it because Tobias Kincaid was holding my brother's future hostage. He used my brother's immigration status to blackmail me, to force me to betray people I had come to respect. He is not a public servant. He's a predator who preys on the vulnerable." The dominoes were falling, one after another, picking up speed. It was then that Eli Dre of the Besk made his move. He stood up, his face a mask of righteous fury. "This has gone on long enough. This entire hearing is a farce, orchestrated by a known criminal element. I am ordering all evidence presented here today to be confiscated as part of an ongoing federal investigation." He signaled to his agents, who started to move toward the witness table. But as they did, a quiet, almost imperceptible signal passed from Dorian to June, who was stationed in a nearby building. On the large screens behind the council members, a simple message appeared: "The Harborview files, now public." A link followed, a link to a decentralized, peer-to-peer network. "You can't seize the truth." "Agent Dre," June's voice said, "broadcast for a split second over the chamber's PA system. Everything you just heard, and more, has just been uploaded to hundreds of public servers. It belongs to the city now." "Checkmate." Dre froze, his face a rictus of fury and impotence. Kincaid looked like a ghost. They had lost. And that's when Orchid made the room disappear. A small, sharp pop, and the chamber began to fill with a thick, gray smoke. It wasn't toxic, but it was disorienting. People started to cough, to panic. The U.S. 8th officers, completely out of their depth, started shouting conflicting orders, only adding to the confusion. This was their last, desperate play to create enough chaos to escape the consequences. But I had seen this before. I grabbed the podium microphone. "Everyone, stay calm," I yelled, my voice cutting through the rising panic. "The smoke is harmless. Please move toward the exits in an orderly fashion. Help the person next to you. If you are near an elderly person, please assist them. Walk. Do not run." My voice, the same one that had calmly laid out the facts of their corruption, now became a beacon in the chaos. And people listened. The stampede toward the doors slowed to an orderly, if hurried, evacuation. My time on the pier, my time facing down fear had taught me something. Leadership wasn't about power. It was about being the calmest person in the room. Through the swirling smoke, I saw a figure trying to slip out a side exit. Kincaid, his lawyer, was gone. Every man for himself. Before he could reach the door, another shadow detached itself from the wall and blocked his path. Dorian, he held no weapon, he made no threat. He just stood there, an immovable object. Kincaid recoiled, his eyes wide with fear. "Into the light, Tobias," Dorian said, his voice a low, final judgment. It felt like a victory. It felt like the end. The liars were exposed, the public was on our side, and the rats were trapped. Then my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, a text from an unknown number. It was a single image, a GPS coordinate, pinpointing a location at the far end of the Redwater terminal. Buoy 12. My blood ran cold. A second message came through. This one from my father's number. The text was cheerful, mundane, and the most terrifying thing I had ever read. "Don't worry about me, little bird. The power flickered out here. Just running down to the pier to buy a new flashlight." Then, a third message. Signal lost. The smoke in the room was nothing compared to the ice that filled my veins. I looked up from my phone, my eyes finding Dorian's through the haze. He saw the look on my face and knew instantly, this hearing, this public spectacle, was never the endgame. It was a diversion, the final move. The checkmate they had been planning all along wasn't about politics or money. It was about herding us to one specific place, at one specific time. Orchid had taken my father. He was the bait, and they were waiting for us at the end of the world. The air at Buoy 12 was a cold, wet shroud. The thick harbor fog had swallowed the familiar skyline, leaving only the skeletal fingers of distant cranes reaching into a starless sky. In the near distance, an old tugboat was moored to the pier, its deck lights casting a sick, yellow pallor on the swirling mist. It was a ghost ship in a dead sea, and on its rusted deck, my father was tied to a bollard. He was upright, his mouth gagged, but from what I could see, he was uninjured. The sight of him, so proud and strong, reduced to a helpless pawn, was a physical blow. Around him, I could see the faint, metallic glint of tripwires, a spider's web of traps woven across the deck. They didn't just want to hurt him, they wanted to force Dorian into the open. We were a small, desperate team, me, Dorian, June, and a quiet, determined Nova, here to atone for her betrayal. We moved through the shadows of the container yard, 4 ghosts in the fog. Dorian had a rifle for overwatch, but I carried the most important things, a compact demolitions kit from Harlan, and my father's old, heavy-duty fisherman's flashlight. Its familiar, worn weight in my hand was an anchor to the man I was here to save. A voice, electronically amplified, cut through the night, "Welcome, Marrowline. The price of admission is simple. The cold wallet and a full confession from Dorian Vale. Live on camera to the kidnapping of Aria Moreno. You have 10 minutes before we get impatient. The fuel valves on this pier are surprisingly sensitive." It was a woman's voice, cold, crisp, and utterly devoid of emotion. I keyed the encrypted radio. "This is Aria. I'm the one you want. Let's talk." While I engaged her, buying seconds, the team worked. June, hunched over a tablet, was already fighting a silent, invisible war, her fingers a blur as she battled for control of the detonator's frequency. Nova, her face grim, studied a thermal image of the deck, tracing the heat signatures of the wiring, mapping the trap. Dorian had melted into the shadows of a crane platform high above, a silent guardian angel with a sniper's scope. The woman on the loudspeaker laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You are a bargaining chip, Miss Moreno, not a negotiator." A sharp crack echoed across the water. It wasn't an explosion. It was a rifle shot. I saw a spark fly from the metal strut just inches from my head. Before I could even react, Dorian was there, a blur of motion tackling me to the ground behind a stack of barrels. He landed on top of me, his body a shield. He let out a sharp, ragged grunt of pain. "Are you okay?" he gasped, his voice tight. "I'm fine," I said, my voice trembling. "You." He rolled off me, and in the dim light, I saw the dark stain blossoming on the shoulder of his jacket. The bullet had gone through him. He stumbled but didn't fall, his face a pale mask of pain. Rage, cold and pure, burned away my fear. I grabbed 2 emergency flares from my belt. The lesson from the Greyfin Bridge roaring back to life, I sparked them both, casting a brilliant, hissing red glare that blinded the night. I threw one to the left and one to the right of the tugboat, creating a wall of disorienting light, ruining the sniper's night vision. Then I grabbed my father's heavy flashlight and slammed it against the side of a massive foghorn control box. The resulting blast of sound was a physical force, a deafening, soul-shaking roar that drowned out all other noise. Chaos was my shield. A figure emerged from the tugboat's cabin, silhouetted against the light, the woman. She was tall, dressed in a sleek, tactical suit, her face sharp and intelligent, impressive. Her voice crackled over the PA system, even as the foghorn blared, but pointless. She held a small, remote detonator. This was the leader. This was Rhea Lark, the former Central Corps security consultant Madeline Shore had warned us about. With a flick of her thumb, she pressed a button. A secondary charge exploded on the pier near the tugboat's mooring lines. Not a lethal blast, but a concussive force that sent a shudder through the entire structure. The deck of the tugboat lurched violently. My father, caught off balance, was thrown against the railing, his head striking the steel with a sickening crack. He slumped, his full weight held up by the ropes. There was no more time for strategy. June. Now I screamed into the radio. I'm in, but she has a manual override. I can't stop it completely, but I can reroute the primary chain. Dorian was already moving, ignoring the fire in his shoulder, his face set. He launched himself across the gap between the pier and the tugboat, landing hard on the slick deck. He pulled a knife and started sawing at the ropes holding my father. I was right behind him. Nova, talk to me. The main charge is wired to the fuel valve, but there's a secondary fuse box on the winch housing. If you can pull the primary fuse, it might create a feedback loop. I saw it, a small, rusted metal box. I scrambled towards it, my fingers fumbling with the latch. Inside was a row of simple glass fuses. The world had narrowed to the space of this boat, to the smell of blood and salt water, to the frantic, ragged sound of our breathing. Rhea was shouting orders, but I blocked them out. I could feel Dorian's pain, his desperate struggle with the ropes. I could feel my own heart hammering against my ribs, threatening to break free. I reached for his uninjured arm, my hand pressing flat against his chest, against the solid, steady beat of his heart. "Lend me your heartbeat," I whispered, the words a desperate prayer. Our eyes locked across the deck, a silent promise exchanged in the heart of the fire. We will survive this, together. Nova, which one? I yelled, my eyes scanning the fuses. Third from the left, the red one. June's voice crackled in my ear. "Aria, I've got control of the sequence, but if she hits the manual override, it'll bypass me. You have 3 seconds. I saw Rhea raise the detonator. My hand went to the red fuse, and then I made a choice. I didn't pull the red one. I grabbed the one next to it, the blue one, and yanked it free. Dorian's head snapped up. "Aria, what are you doing?" But in the same instant, his hand closed over mine, his grip firm. "I trust you," he said, his voice a raw whisper. It was a gamble, a feint. I was counting on Rhea's arrogance, on her believing she was smarter than the toll booth worker. "Foolish girl," Rhea sneered into the microphone, and she slammed her thumb down on the main button of the detonator, triggering the manual override. She was going for the kill shot. There was a loud click, and then silence. By pulling the wrong fuse, I had triggered the feedback loop Nova had predicted. June, seizing the opening, had used that loop to create a system-wide dead short. The entire demolition network went dark. The fight was over. Rhea Lark stood in stunned disbelief as 2 of her own men, their faces grim, grabbed her arms. The proof of Kincaid's blackmail that Nova had provided also included the payment trails to every Orchid operative. Faced with exposure, they chose survival. The wail of USATH sirens filled the air. They arrived in force, ready to secure the scene, but they were met by a human wall. The dock workers, alerted by Harlan, had gathered at the entrance to the pier, their phones held high, 100 live streams turning the public's eyes on the corruption. The hashtag #BridgeWorker was trending across the city. USAth hesitated, their authority gone. Then came Dre, his face purple with rage, ready to arrest us all. But before he could speak, Madeline Shore stepped out of the crowd, flanked by 2 stone-faced state marshals. She held up a warrant. "Eli Dre, Tobias Kincaid," she announced, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "By order of the State Attorney General's office, you are under arrest on federal charges of conspiracy, racketeering, and corruption." The final knot had been untied. My father was conscious, his head bleeding, but his eyes were clear. He looked at me, then at Dorian, who was leaning heavily against the railing, his face pale. Ezekiel reached out a hand and placed it on Dorian's good shoulder. "Son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. It was a single word, but it was everything. The adrenaline finally faded, and Dorian's legs gave out. He sank to his knees. I rushed to his side, cradling his face in my hands. The fog swirled around us, the sounds of the city a distant murmur. I leaned down and kissed him, a kiss full of salt and smoke and the desperate, breathtaking taste of survival. My hand, steady now, traced the line of his jaw. "It's real now," I whispered, my forehead pressed against his. "I choose you." Dawn broke over a different harbor view. The Kite House Foundation, funded by a new, transparent Port Authority safety fund, opened its doors, a real beacon of hope. The Marrow Line began the process of becoming a legitimate, employee-owned logistics cooperative. The city was healing. And I went back to work. One last shift on the Grayfin Bridge. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the water, a familiar black sedan pulled to a stop just past my booth. Dorian got out. The sling on his arm was the only sign of the war we had won. He walked to my window and smiled, a real, unguarded smile that reached his steel-gray eyes. "I finally found you," he whispered, repeating the words that had started it all. But the meaning was new. It wasn't a claim of ownership. It was a statement of fact, of a journey's end and a new one's beginning. He opened my door, and I took his offered hand. We stood together, looking out at the endless lines of containers in the distance, no longer ghosts of a corrupt system, but symbols of a city's beating heart. And as the first ship of the evening blew its horn, a long, low, hopeful sound, it felt less like a noise and more like the opening notes of a new song, our song. Thank you so much for listening to our story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. Please, drop a comment down below and let's share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey, please consider subscribing to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories. Give this video a like and show some extra support by hitting that hype button. It helps more than you know and allows these stories to be heard by so many more.